Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and in today's video we're going to be doing something just a little bit different than I usually do. In today's video we're just going to be focusing on a base rather than painting a miniature. And in this video what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a beach base. A few weeks ago I created a pirate who was stepping out of the beach onto the shore, and a few people have asked how I created that base. So this video is going to be how I created that base, and I'm also going to do it in two different ways. One way is going to be completely free and will basically cost you absolutely nothing because you'll already have the supplies around. And the other way will be using some more expensive products and more elaborate ways. So I hope this is going to be helpful for you guys, whether you want to create some awesome beach bases for miniatures to stand on. So if you enjoy this video, please don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And with all that out of the way, let's carry on to the video. Okay, so starting off with our first base here, and this one's going to be our free one, with using all the supplies that we pretty much already have on hand. So to start off, we're going to use some modpoge here, which I use quite often in placing things on bases, but PVA glue would also work as well. But just one thing to notice with PVA glue rather than modpoge is PVA glue tends to shrink as it's drying, whereas modpoge is able to hold its shape a lot better without any of the shrinkage. So if you can get modpoge, I'd highly recommend getting that first. And then it's just a matter of laying out the modpoge in the way we want to have all our sand placed. So I would advise not just going straight down the middle and cutting it in half. Give it a little bit of variation, make it a little bit more fancy than just a straight line down the middle. And then once we've done that, all we're going to need is we're going to need to grab some sand. Now you could sieve out some small fine sand to get the smallest finest particles. You could also just go to the beach and get some sand. You could buy some, which is all I did here. I bought some sand for some other things, so I'm already using it anyway. But there are plenty of options to have this for completely free. Don't worry about paying for it if you don't have to. And then all we're doing is sprinkling it on top of the modpoge pretty generously, but also making sure that we're keeping a little bit of control so I'm not spilling too much on the into the tray unnecessarily. I just want to keep it covered, and then I'm going to keep it covered like this and let it dry for just a little bit of time before we move on to the next step. Then once all that sand is completely dry, we can start moving on to the next step. So I'm going to be using two colors here. I'm going to be using some voildshield blue and some crystal blue, but any light or dark blue will do in this situation. And then what I'm going to do is just paint the edge where the sand is hitting the actual base of the miniature, and we want to be placing out the layers, of course starting with the light blue, since light blue is mainly where the sand hits the beach, and then it gets darker as it goes further out to sea. So we're just placing this on in layers. This will probably take a couple of layers to do so we don't get too many of the streak marks on here, but just remember that we want to start off with that blue, and I'm sort of just patting it on rather than painting it on because I want to try and avoid the streaks, and I'd rather have little blotches that would represent ripples in the sand rather than having any sort of streaking waves, and it's going to look sort of too uniform and unnatural. And you can see here that I'm just patting it into one another, keep going between the colors. I'm not worrying too much about separating these colors out. I want to have them slightly mixed, and it's just going like that until you get to the point where you have it where you want it and it looks natural. Okay, so once all that paint is nice and dry, we can start moving on to the next step. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to come in with some modpoge. Now this is gloss modpoge. The other modpoge I used before was matte modpoge. So this is going to give a nice glossy effect. You may also have this around for doing other various things. Ordinary PVA glue is ordinarily glossy, so you could do it with the PVA glue here as well. But just be aware too that the PVA glue does shrink, and you will notice it, so you may have to do it in a couple of extra layers, or meticulously watch it as it's drying. Whereas the modpoge, since it doesn't shrink as much, you don't have to worry about that pretty much at all while doing this. So that's why I've gone with the modpoge here, and hopefully you'd have some around on hand anyway. And then it's just a matter of patting it down and being very sort of splotchy with it rather than brushing it on, because we still want to go with that whole nice ripple effect. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to our expensive base, as we're calling it. And to start off with that, we're going to use some Vallejo earth texture. Now I'm going to be placing the earth texture over the whole entire base this time rather than just one half, because I'm going to be having it as you can see into the ocean floor, and it's going to be sand all the way down because I'm going to be adding some water effects to this base. And this time too, I'm also going to be just doing it pretty much flat, halfway across, not like the other one where we gave it a little bit of wave. This one I'm just going to be doing straight across, so it's a little bit more straightforward, and you'll be able to see how the water effects and stuff work a little bit easier than the last one, because we're going to have it being more depth of water, and I want to show that off a little bit more. It'd be a little bit harder to see on camera and stuff if I had some overarching waves, so it's just for filming purposes. But I would advise just making it look a little bit more natural than straight across. So then once we have our land mass and our water area planned out, as you can see I've got here, all I'm going to be doing is coming in with some primer. Any primer would sort of do. I'm just going with this neutral grey primer, and we're going to be priming up the whole thing so we can get it ready for painting, because we are going to need to paint this one. We don't want to be leaving it just our ordinary colours. Like I said, we're going the extra mile with this base, trying to show off the fanciness rather than our last base, which is pretty much no painting other than the water. So just giving it a good overall coverage here, making sure that we get into all those little nooks and crannies, especially since there's tiny little bits of sand everywhere. Then once we have the base primed up, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to come in with some averland sunset, and this is going to be a nice base tone for our sand, and it's a nice good deep yellow that we want, sort of a mustard yellow. So we want that as a nice good starting point, and of course we just want to cover it over everything. And remember, again, we want to try to get into all those nooks and crannies, since it is little tiny bits of sand that the earth texture is, so we really want to get that in everywhere. Then once all that's dry, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying a wash now, and using seraphim sepia is going to really help accentuate all of that. Since it's a nice sepia style wash, it's going to really help us with all those shadows and all those indentations and stuff. It's really going to help liven up the piece. And I know what you're thinking, it's looking very, very cartoony at the moment and not quite how my one looked like in the picture from before on the pirate, but trust me, this is how I did it originally. As we continue on, it's going to start looking more and more realistic, but we will need these base colors down first, so we want to have them nice and strong. Then once we've done that and it's all dried up, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to come in with some khaki, and we're going to be dry brushing it on, and this is where we're going to get a lot of that color from and have that really beach look and that sand effect, especially since the earth texture has little tiny bits of sand in it. The dry brushing is going to get it nice and picked out, and it's going to really highlight all those little areas of sand. And as you can see, where we've placed all the earth texture, there's been some slight wavy patterns, so it gives it a more natural look, as well as sand is shifted and stuff on the beach, and it's also giving it that more realistic sand texture and color. Then once we have all that dry and complete, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to grab some masking tape, and what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to mask off that base. As you can see, I've just placed some on here, made it nice and tight around the edge, making sure we press it up, we have it all nice and flattened down so we can get ready for that water texture, so we're not going to spill it anywhere, and we just want to make sure that's nice and tight. Now we're coming into some of the magic with this piece and taking it to that next step, so we're going to be using some vallejo water texture to do this. And I'm just going to be pouring it into this little cup bowl, as you can see here. So we also want to tint it just a little bit blue as well. So using some blue tone in here, you could also use some blue paint. I'm just going with the blue tone inks. Seem to work a little bit better with mixing into things, since I don't want it to be really, really bright blue. I want it to have a more subtle effect, so just placing it in here and adding a few drops of our blue tone in here to get that blue color that we want. Now, be very aware that you want to add this one drop at a time and mix it together and see how it is first before you add what you think will be enough, because it'll always be way less than you think. As you can see, I've just placed one drop in here and it's already stained it really, really blue, and we're pretty much close to the color we want. So just be very aware of that. Just one drop at a time, and then mix it to see how you get the color you want. And then once you have the colors mixed to how you like it, we're just coming back to our piece now, and we have it all nice and masked off so it shouldn't spill anywhere, and it's just a matter of carefully pouring it out and getting that right amount you want. And you can see I didn't even need as much as I had mixed up. It's a very small amount, and it's giving off the nice blue water effect as well, since we only added a drop of color at a time, so we can clearly see it here on the piece. Now this here is an optional step you can use to get rid of bubbles in resin. This here is just a small blowtorch, and you just spray it over in a distance, getting the heat, and with the heat alone, you'll be able to get rid of some of these bubbles. But I advise you be very, very careful while doing this, because bad things can happen. So anyway, with that drying, what we're going to be doing is we're going to come in now with some matte white. And the matte white, what we're going to be doing with is we're just going to be stippling it pretty much on the edges of the areas where the waves would naturally hit the sand itself and give it that sort of like frothy effect. So that's what we're trying to go for. We also want to go for just a couple more down the area so it looks like a couple of waves are coming in to crash in onto that beach shoreline, and you can see it's perfect for hiding up that transition we have between the two colors as well. So take your time with this. It'll take a little while to get that in. You'll need to build it up with just a few layers to make it look a little bit more natural so it's not so transparent as it is here. And then once our resin is dry enough to work with, what we can do is we can get ready to start adding on some more here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing the tape, and you can see it's left a little bit of a film just along the edge where it's naturally sort of sunk down and shrunk. Now, it shrunk a lot more than I thought it was going to. I knew it had a little bit of a shrinking quality, but just be aware that it shrinks quite a bit. And so what we're going to need to do is grab a knife here, or a scalpel, or a pair of scissors, and we just want to carefully go around that edge, slowly scraping it off until we get it to that nice sharp edge that we want. And as you might have noticed, that knife was getting me absolutely nowhere, so I just decided to brute force it with some scissors. It's going to be a little bit less elegant, but I need that nice sharp edge for you guys, so you can see what I'm trying to do here. So don't be afraid if you need to use some scissors instead of the knife. But anyway, what we want to do is just trim up this edge so it's nice and even so we can start working on to the next part. Then once we have that nice and squared off and rounded, you can see it's dipped down a little bit here, so we want to fill in some of that gap, and that's where I'm going to use the gloss Mod Podge to do that. I didn't want to pour another layer of resin and then it start having these super shrinking qualities. It is still have a little bit of depth there, so adding the Mod Podge on here is just going to be a great bit of filler to get that height raised a little bit in the middle there, as you can see, and we can also use it to add in a little bit more water and ripple effects onto the miniature as well, because one thing to know with the still water is it does dry completely flat and level, so there's absolutely no waves in here. So you might want to spatter the Mod Podge around just like this so you get a little bit of water moving action on the piece. And then once that's dried out, it's time to do the exact same thing we just did with our last piece, with our super cheap and free piece. We want to do the exact same to give off that wave ripple effect, and doing the exact same thing here, we're doing is stippling it along the edges where the wave is naturally going to crash up against the shoreline, and we also want to do just a few more a bit further down as well, so looks like we've got some waves coming in. Now you could use some extra water effects. I know there are some that give off sort of this effect that we're going for here as well by building it up, but I unfortunately don't have any of those types of water effects, so we're just going for what I've got here, and it's going to achieve the exact same thing anyway. And it can be a little bit easier if you want to place a miniature on here, since this base is actually quite level, so you'll be able to fit a miniature on here nice and easy without having to worry about any awkward placing effects, especially when it comes to water on a miniature base. And since we're on our expensive piece compared to our nice free one, we're going to be adding in one little extra piece, and we're going to use some wild meadow tufts for this one here. But you can use any tuff you'd like. You want to preferably go for something that's a little more beach themed, so you want to go for those greys with and yellows and more stuff like that, rather than your bright greens, so it looks a little bit more like it's supposed to be on the beach. And then of course it's just affixing it to the base, and voila, you have your completed beach base here of our expensive version. And there's just one more little thing I wanted to quickly add before we show off the final pieces and how they compare to one another, is I'm just going to be black lining the base. I just like the way that black lining the base does. It sort of gives it that diorama sort of completed look, and it just helps it out and stand out as this is a piece and we're capturing a scene in time rather than just a miniature base, and I think black lining always helps with that. That's just my personal preference, but you could also just leave it the way it is. And there we have it, everyone. There's our 2 bases we have completed. Our cheap and easy to do base with stuff you've got around on the left, and our more expensive with things we've used to add in and enhance and make this base as pretty as I can make it with all the stuff I have available to me on the right. And you can see that they are both very usable in playtime. It just depends on what you need here, and of course with the one on the left I went for as cheap as I could go, so we didn't bother painting up any of that sand or anything like that. We could have jazzed it up just a little bit more. I didn't even add any tufts to it because I wanted to keep it as cheap and as easy as it was and have it with just the stuff that you've got around the house. Whereas on the right we went a bit more flashy and added in all those extra things. So I hope this has been useful for you guys in making your own bases that are beach themed, and I hope it can help you in the future. So I'd like to thank you all for watching, guys, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.